Buyers don't have any place to go until the closing date. Sellers are not able to move out of the property until after the closing date. The seller and buyer's temporary lease is a form provided to us by TREC so that they can move in before closing or stay in after closing. But some of the worst things I have ever seen in real estate have happened during a temporary lease. So what do? Stay tuned. Welcome to Mondays with Micah. I'm your host, Micah. Today, we're talking about the TREC form, the seller or buyer's temporary lease. Oh my God, I love these forms because as soon as the buyer writes a contract, I'm gonna put him in a temp lease so he can just move his stuff right in, make it real nice. That sounds like a great plan until the buyer gets disapproved for his loan, and then you have to move out. Get them out. Get a court order to get the squatters out of your home. And then on the seller side, sellers are moving in and staying there after closing. I've seen it. I've seen 2 houses burnt down after closing. I've seen 1 burned down prior to closing, all during a temporary lease. How do we make sure it goes smoothly? Number 1 is understand what it is that you're signing and what the principals are signing. Here we go. Those temp leases, if it is a seller's temporary residential lease, well, that is from the closing date all the way through a date into the future after closing. And check it out, there's a limit to how long each of these leases can be, and the limit, whether it is a buyer's lease or a seller's lease, is no more than 90 days. Do you know why it's only 90 days? Because anything longer than that would be considered renting to own. Now, 90 days. Let's say our seller moves in or stays in the property at closing, starts paying rent money to the new owner, and they have to be out within 90 days. Well, you also have to think of some other circumstances. What type of loan is the buyer have? Most of these government loans are going to require them to move in within a certain amount of time. For instance, right now, VA loans are requiring their borrower to move in within 60 days, or it's what we consider mortgage fraud. Now, that means we have to know a lot of things before we put in an amount of time here. Number 1, that it can't be longer than 90 days. And number 2, check with your lender. How long can the buyer wait until they are required to move in per their particular loan program? You don't want to help your borrower commit mortgage fraud. Now, that's the first thing. If it's a seller's temporary lease that's moving from the closing date to no longer than 90 days out in the future. Well, what if it's the buyer? They are moving in prior to closing, and again, it can't be longer than 90 days. All right, got it. Let's move to the next one. So how much do we charge for rent? How do we do that? What do we put in the blank? Well, it's negotiable, the amount of rent, but it is a per day rate. We got to figure out what we want to pay per day, kind of calculated over the amount of time that they're spending there. And then when is that due? Let's talk about the seller on top. When does the seller have to pay his rent? Well, that is the date of closing. So at the day of closing, remember the seller is going to be staying in the property after he relinquishes ownership and he's got a new owner. He's the tenant. So at closing is when his rent is due for the remainder of that month or however long he's staying. And the buyer, when is his rent money due? And that is at the commencement of the lease. When all parties agree and sign on the lease, rent money is due for the amount of time that the buyer is staying prior to closing up to the closing date. What do we do about repairs and maintenance? Who's responsible for that stuff? Well, the addenda says the tenant. No matter who is the tenant, whether it's the seller or the buyer, they are responsible for little normal wear and tear repairs. They're responsible for maintaining the property, mowing the yard, and all the other stuff that goes along with maintenance. Yeah, it's up to the tenant. We got to put that expectation out there. And this is when we start getting into trouble. Buyer moves into the property and prior to closing realizes there's more stuff that's broken than what we knew about and what we asked the seller in our repair amendment. Now they're sitting in the property going, we're not closing until you do all these things. Well, we got to point them in the direction of this agreement that says they are responsible for repairs and maintenance. All other repairs have been talked about and written in a repair amendment if we had one. If we don't have one, we're not getting those repairs. If we do have one, we're only getting what we negotiated in that repair amendment. So anything beyond a repair amendment, up to the tenant if it's normal wear and tear type repairs and maintenance. Now, last one, insurance. Whoa. This affects both parties. That document says both buyer and seller, whoever is renting and whoever is the owner, has to have insurance. That means if the seller moves in after closing, he's got to change his insurance from homeowners to renters. Let's say the buyer moves in prior to closing. The homeowner has got to contact his insurance company and switch it. Make sure the insurance company knows now there's a renter there. And of course, the buyer's going to have renter's insurance. Make sure those things are in place, because I have seen not one, not two, but 3 properties burn down during a temporary residential lease. 2 of those, all parties got their insurance in place and everything was fine. We were able to rebuild the house. One of them, seller did not change his insurance over, and it did not cover the damage that was done. It was not good. So today, you now know all the ins and outs of the seller and buyer's temporary residential lease, how to fill in the majority of the blanks, all the tricky stuff. You're a pro. And remember, an educated agent is a more successful agent. The more you come to class, the more you come to Mondays with Micah, the more educated and the more successful you will be. I can't wait to see you on the next episode of Mondays with Micah. Why does real estate education have to be boring? It doesn't have to. Real estate education can be fun. It can be hilarious. It can be a blast. You know where it is a blast? Right here on LOL Lessons in Real Estate YouTube channel. Right here, you can subscribe and get notifications every time awesome new videos drop. Boom. Join us. LOL Lessons in Real Estate. It's the most fun you'll ever have learning about real estate. I promise.